Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show. Cromwell was absolutely confident about winning this duel. He was intoxicated with the unprecedented powerful feeling after breaking through to level 13. He believed that no one in Jeros's younger generation was his opponent, including Felix, who once made him feel fear. The shame in Emerald Tower had to be cleansed with blood. When he was answering old Merlin, Cromwell began to plan in his heart how to kill his opponent as cruelly as possible. The humiliation through words alone was inadequate, it was not enough to wash away the shame on himself. The mage named Felix had to shed the last drop of his blood before he could die in endless pain and remorse. There are 2 pieces of equipment in the basement, in the 3rd compartment on the right side of the door. I've told you before how to open it. Now go and take them out. Yes, father. Moments later, Cromwell returned to old Merlin with a mage robe and a staff. These 2 things were meant to be given to you after you became a magic shooter. Little did I expect, old Merlin looked at the 2 pieces of equipment and remembered that Cromwell would never be able to progress in his life. He couldn't help but feel dejected. It's all right, father. I am also a magic shooter now. Old Merlin nodded. He stretched his hand and picked up the staff. Even I have never used this ether staff before. It has been passed down in the Merlin family for more than 10 generations and can be said to be the most powerful piece of equipment in the family hoard. Look at this magical crystal, what do you feel? A powerful mana, at least level 15 or above. Not bad, old Merlin nodded. There was a glimmer of approval in his eyes. This is a level 18 magical crystal. In addition to increasing the magic power, it also contains one of the biggest secrets that only the heads of the Merlin family in previous generations knew. This level 18 magical crystal can be activated by a special method, and when it is activated, you can get a chance to cast an overstepping spell of 5 levels. Cromwell hissed, sucking in a cold breath. What did an overstepping spell of 5 levels mean? Take himself as an example. He was a level 13 magic shooter. If the magical crystal was activated, he would be able to cast a level 18 spell. Such a terrifying level of spell would even be able to defeat old Merlin and Jirian. And this soul branding robe, old Merlin put down the staff and picked up the grey mage robe. It has magic resistance attributes. After wearing it, chances of you getting hurt by low-level spells will be much smaller. In addition, it also has space for 16 scrolls. Before the duel begins, I will prepare 16 scrolls for you. I get it, father. Cromwell looked at the 2 pieces of equipment with some disregard. He felt that old Merlin was making a mountain out of a molehill. Now that he was a level 13 magic shooter, he might even be able to fight the leaders of the other mage families. That Felix was at most level 8 or 9 in strength. He did not need any equipment to aid him, he could easily crush Felix with his strength alone. Are you thinking I'm making a big deal of a fuss here? How could old Merlin not see what Cromwell was thinking with that vision of his? It made old Merlin helpless. Although Cromwell had grown up a lot after the setback at the Emerald Tower, his supercilious character had never changed completely. Father, I feel. Say no more. Cromwell tried to justify himself, but old Merlin waved his hand wearily. There's one thing I haven't told you in order to avoid distracting you. That day, outside the Emerald Tower, before Jirian came out, I tried to suppress Felix with my mental strength. Do you know what the result was? Cromwell looked at old Merlin with surprise in his eyes. Old Merlin sighed. I wonder what kind of luck has struck the Guild of Magic to have such a genius with them. Not only is he a pharmacist, he also has an alarming magical talent. His mental strength is stronger than any mage's I have ever seen. At that time, if I hadn't suppressed him with the strength of an archmage, I might have lost our Merlin family's face without waiting for Jirian to come out. For all his arrogance, Cromwell was not really an idiot. Especially after breaking through to level 13 in magic, he understood better than before what a powerful mental strength meant to a mage. Don't belittle your opponent. And don't forget, he's a pharmacist at the same time. Old Merlin carefully handed the 2 pieces of equipment to Cromwell. There are 7 days left before the duel, and you still have a chance to complete the final ritual. If you can break through to level 14 in these 7 days, the Merlin family is really going to win this duel. I get it, father. Cromwell nodded heavily. With the 2 pieces of equipment in his hands, he bowed himself out of the room and gently closed the door behind him. Meanwhile, inside the Emerald Tower, Lin Li had once again fallen under the arcane missiles. Looks like you need a little luck, old Grim, who won, had a look of relief on his face. If he hadn't cast the spell too fast to trigger the bite of mana, he might have lost the combat. The young man progressed too fast. Anduin was right, he was a real magic genius. This speed of improvement was enough to make any mage jealous. At the beginning, he could use the strength of a magic shooter to triumph over him easily. But these days, Lin Li had made a leap from day to day. He had even required luck to win on this day. Every time he entered the hall, old Grim would feel that he was standing in front of a stranger. That kind of feeling was too strange. They obviously looked the same, but the strength was completely different. It was less than 10 days from the beginning, when Lin Li had no ability to retaliate, to now, when he could exchange strikes with old Grim himself. Old Grim lived 100 years and had never seen such a monster before. It was as if he had been born to learn magic. In particular, his terrifying combat talent gave old Grim chills whenever he thought about it. Old Grim felt incredulous looking at the young mage before his eyes. The same person couldn't even tell if a spell was really released a few days ago, but in the battle just now, he accurately judged old Grim's intention with a mental confusion spell. He seized the brief pause after old Grim's spellcasting and successfully suppressed it with a few low-level spells. Old Grim's fear swelled as he watched Lin Li grow stronger day by day. He recalled the shot of ice blast earlier on. If he had not encountered the bite of mana, the one lying on the ground now would be him. I'm still too impatient. Lin Li recovered from the dizziness caused by the arcane missiles, but he was not in a hurry to get up. Instead, he sat on the cold floor and summed up his earlier failure. This was a habit he had developed in the recent days. After each failure, he would analyze the combat and look for the key to his failure. This is just one of the reasons. Old Grim shook his head. With your current mental strength, even if your casting speed is fast, it would be hard to encounter the bite of mana. You were just unlucky this time to encounter it. Your real problem lies in your mentality. You have been losing these few days. Today, you finally got the chance to win, so you'd inevitably be a little out of your mind. You wanted to beat me with that ice blast, but in that situation, I was already under the spell of the mana retroaction and couldn't cast any spells for 5 seconds. Although the elemental shield was still there, it had already blocked off several low-level spells. Why did you not continue to use low-level spells to suppress me then? You only needed 2 or 3 wind blades to cut through the elemental shield. At that time, why did you choose to recite the spell for Ice Blast that took 3 seconds long? Did you ever consider that if there was a mistake with the Ice Blast, then the opportunity you've managed to grab would slip away from you and even put you in a passive position throughout the combat? Lin Li carefully recalled the situation at that time. It was indeed just as old Grim said, his mentality was unbalanced in the face of the coming victory. Old Grim's expression was stern. In his heart, he had already regarded Lin Li as his student. The bite of mana this time was by coincidence. However, a real powerful mage would never leave any chance to his opponent. Such is the battle between mages. One such coincidence can be fatal. Maybe you're much stronger than your opponent. You can win him 99 times in 100 battles, but that one time could kill you and you'd never have the chance to fight him another 99 times. Thank you. The old man's words fell into his ears, and Lin Li felt a twinge of gratitude in his heart. He knew very well that the experiences old Grim mentioned were summed up in his lifetime. This was more precious than any magic knowledge, and no mage would be willing to speak of it except those who really cared about him. But, Felix, at this point, there was a smile of relief on old Grim's face. Your performance amazes me. If it had been 2 days ago, I would never have expected you to push me to such a degree. I even secretly used a magic steel once earlier on. This is a level 14 spell. No wonder, Lin Li tumbled. I was thinking I had lost my elemental shield too fast. Heh heh. Why don't we do it again? But this time you promise you won't use magic steel. Sure. Old Grim agreed readily. The battles with Lin Li these days had made him feel like he was a few years younger, as if he had returned to the days when he was a young man following the team of adventurers to every corner of Anril, hunting for magical beasts and precious herbs. At the same time, the old man nodded his head. Lin Li, sitting on the floor, had released 2 shots of wind blades with a swish. He had prepared the 2 wind blades for long, only waiting for Old Grim to accept the invitation. Old Grim had said that himself, a mage was not a knight and should cast a spell whenever possible. There was nothing to worry about bad matters as long as you could kill your opponent. A dead body was not entitled to talk about matters. Not bad, you learnt fast. Old Grim was not flustered. An ice armor was erected and easily blocked the wind blades released by Lin Li. It was then followed by a recitation that was unhurried yet remarkably fluent. Just as his spell was about to end, he suddenly felt an abnormal surge of mana. The raging fire element seemed to have frozen suddenly. Old Grim looked up and saw Lin Li's triumphant smile. This was a brilliant mana retroaction, released just a second before the end of the spell. It not only disrupted Old Grim's spellcasting rhythm, but also successfully consumed the duration of his ice armor. However, Old Grim did not panic. With a thin layer of ice armor, he resisted the suppression of the low-level spells that came after. The battle between the 2 men dazzled Jirian. Artful spellcasting techniques, precise time calculation, rapid attack and defense changeover, all kinds of qualities were displayed incisively and vividly. Especially in these 2 days, as Lin Li's strength skyrocketed day by day, the battles became more and more exciting, making Jirian reluctant to leave. Unfortunately, he received a message from Kevin just as he was watching in excitement. The Shadow's Nest had once again barged into the Demon Fall Valley. Iserhole, you've got guts. In the guild hall, the furious Jirian slammed his fist onto the table and nearly smashed the crystal ball connecting to the Demon Fall Valley. In his towering rage, Jirian spoke to Kevin in the crystal ball in a shouting voice. What is the damn situation in the Demon Fall Valley now? They have around a dozen thieves that sneaked in from the Night Song Forest. They destroyed 2 guard towers and took the mages in the towers hostage. Bloody hell! Jirian broke out in curses. After a while, he gradually calmed down. How many people have been taken hostage? A total of 4. Write a letter to Iserhole right now to request an exchange of hostages. Didn't we capture a few Shadow's Nest people last time? Exchange them. If they don't agree, you can increase the price a little. Anyhow, we must get our people back, Jirian said in one breath and paused before adding, there are 7 days left before the duel, you must hang in there. If you can't keep the outlying guard towers, give them up. We can recover them anytime. The most important thing is that you are all right. Kevin, who was holding his ground in the Demon Fall Valley, passed every day as if it were a year. Lin Li, who was in the Emerald Tower, felt like time was flying by. In the blink of an eye, 7 days were reduced to 1 day left. Accompanied by Jirian, Lin Li walked into the level certification hall once again. Old Grim had just left half an hour ago. Before he left, the old man's expression was somewhat hurt. In one afternoon, Lin Li had beaten him 4 times in a row, and each time was done neatly and efficiently. He'd even used magic steel on one occasion, but still failed to avoid a defeat. Even Jirian, who was wild with joy while watching, couldn't help but curse inwardly. Beast. Old Grim was a legendary mage, though he used only the power of a magic shooter, it was hardly justifiable to beat him over and over again. Go and certify your level once more. With your current strength, you should have reached the magic shooter realm. At Old Grim's reminder, Lin Li suddenly remembered that he had not gone to certify his level for a long time. He wondered how much progress he had made after this period of tempering. Still the same empty level certification hall, still the same crystal ball protected by the mage wefts. Under the eyes of Jirian, Lin Li once again pressed his hand on the crystal ball. As time went by, the light on the crystal ball became more and more dazzling. Lin Li had once again broken his own record. This time, the mana output was extended by a full 2 minutes, to become a horrifying 30 minutes in total. 30 minutes, Jirian's jaw was wide open, and looked as if an egg could be stuffed into it. He stared dumbfounded for long before asking incredulously, "You little bastard, are you still human?" To Jirian, this kid was a monster in human skin. The initial 28 minutes was enough to put people in despair. To think this beast in human skin could extend the time. Jirian was even wondering if this bastard would blow up the crystal ball directly when he came back in another few years' time. Before Jirian's dumbstruck eyes, the brightness of the crystal ball soared through level 9 without a doubt, and then went straight into the realm of a magic shooter. What drove Jirian completely mad was that the light still showed no signs of stopping after it had passed the realm of the magic shooter, and it broke through level 11 with an irresistible force. Damn. Magic shooter, it indeed is the magic shooter. When the crystal ball's brightness rested at level 12, Jirian's screams almost lifted the roof off. Bloody hell, it's a level 12 magic shooter at that. Level 12? That much? Lin Li couldn't help feeling astounded. He had been practicing with Old Grim every day recently, and he could really feel his strength growing by leaps and bounds. But he had never expected the extent of his ascension to be so great. Not only did he enter the realm of the magic shooter directly, he also reached a height of a level 12 magic shooter in just over 10 days. Heck, you tell me, are you human? After practicing with Grim Burnside for a few days, you've jumped from level 9 to level 12, Jirian had gone totally insane, grabbing Lin Li's neck and shaking it with all his might. I've fought for decades, and had 800 if not 1,000 battles in total, so why have I never got promoted so fast before? How would I know? F***ck, this is inhuman. Jirian was extremely indignant, and looked at Lin Li with suspicion. If you continue practicing with Grim Burnside for another couple of days, will you break through to the Archmage realm directly? You're dreaming. Lin Li was at a loss whether to laugh or cry hearing Jirian's whimsical words. Right, Jirian chuckled embarrassedly as he wiped off the cold sweat that broke out on his forehead. To break through to the realm of an archmage could only be said out of fun. If there was really such a good thing in the world, why did they need to study magic? They could just battle with a legendary mage like Old Grim or Anduin, who would probably be worked to death. In fact, Jirian knew that the root of Lin Li's achievements lay not only in his unique talent, but also in his diligence and accumulation. It could be said that Jirian had watched this talented mage grow up. From the level 8 mage when he first came to the Guild of Magic to the level 12 magic shooter he had broken through today, Jirian was perfectly clear how much sweat and effort Lin Li had put in the process. Not to mention the Emerald Tower, even if you looked all over Gerosa City, there was probably no mage beyond level 8 who still practiced the basic skill of elemental sequencing every day, and more so no one would stay in the library for a whole day just to find a shorter spell. But Lin Li could. Jirian often found this genius mage staying in the room for a whole day. When asked what he was doing, his answer was actually practicing elemental sequencing. Gerosis was the famous city of chaos in northern Amril. There were 18 forces here and a life full of splendor and various temptations. Even an honest guy like Kevin failed to resist the temptation and sparked off a relationship with the daughter of a wealthy businessman a few years back. But this young man, who was several years younger than Kevin, could resist the temptation. With his status as a potion master, the wealth of over 1 million gold coins on the crystal card, plus the strength of a level 9 mage, there would be countless ladies willing to throw themselves on him with him just standing around in the daylight square. But he did not, and was instead holed up in the Emerald Tower every day, studying magic or making potions, as if these were all his amusements. This made Jirian perplexed but pleased at the same time. The accumulation of diligence and perseverance finally broke out at once and led him to leap directly from level 9 to level 12. The combat with Old Grim was merely an inducement. Without his previous diligence and perseverance, even if the legendary mage personally guided him, he would only obtain some additional combat experience, which would not be helpful to the ascension of magic level. For Lin Li, the fighting over the past 10 days was like a key that opened the door to his dreams. Before this, he had been wandering in front of the door for a long time. After coming out from the level certification hall, Lin Li locked himself in his room once again. The duel with Cromwell would begin in a day's time. He had a lot of things to prepare before it. As Old Grim said, a truly powerful mage had to put an end to all accidents. Lin Li couldn't prevent all accidents by himself with his strength, so he had to prepare some items for himself. It was a must to wear the Robe of Wrath, which could carry 30 scrolls, and which he enchanted with magic resistance attributes using the Abyss Mithril Gold Rod. The space to carry 30 scrolls was a little unnecessary, but the magic resistance attribute was definitely what Lin Li needed. How could Lin Li have gotten away unharmed at Castellan Isaac's banquet if he had not worn the Robe of Wrath? After deciding on the mage robe, Lin Li fumbled about in the Ring of Endless Storm again. But the result was embarrassing. Despite the extent he was rich to in the Endless World, he had forgotten to prepare a set of equipment for his mage smurf. The Robe of Wrath was the only thing he had. So, Lin Li had to dig out the winter staff, which was the only equipment Anduin gave him. Although the tip of the staff was inlaid with a magical crystal from a level 8 frost troll, it was a handsome weapon for Lin Li, who had always loved ice spells. Lin Li suddenly saw two familiar things when he took out the winter staff from the Ring of Endless Storm. It was a dirty canvas and a ring embedded with a black diamond. Lin Li vaguely remembered that the two things should have been offered by the Leviathan gorilla when he went to rescue Ina. The dirty canvas was quickly thrown aside by Lin Li, for he couldn't understand what was painted on it anyway, but he was delighted by the ring. This was something that carried a strong magical wave. When they found it in the tree hole of the Leviathan gorilla, Lin Li knew that it was at least on the same level as his Robe of Wrath. But after coming to Gerosa City, he had no use for it at the time, and he also had no time to use it. So, he had actually forgotten about it in the long run. Now that he had found it again, Lin Li decided to study it in detail. He first tried to input mana into the ring to see if he could trigger the magic attributes of the ring itself. This was general knowledge Anduin had taught him. If he was unable to judge the use of a piece of magic equipment, the best way to find out was to input mana into it. Under the stimulus of the mana, most magic equipment would reveal its own attributes. What Anduin had taught him was indeed true. Lin Li had just begun to input his mana into the ring when the black diamond inlaid on it began to emit a faint light. The light was strange, deep and dark, like the eyes of the legendary abyssal demon. Lin Li's confidence rose seeing there was a reaction from the ring. He slowly began to increase the intensity of his mana output. It was a process that required patience. An overly intense mana output was likely to destroy rare magic equipment. But very soon, Lin Li found that he was being too careful. The intensity of mana output was constantly increasing, and the light coming out from the black diamond glowed brighter and brighter. But the true attribute of the ring was never revealed. Lin Li began to feel a little anxious. The increase of his mana output began to amplify from the previous caution to a subsequent full output. But the strange ring remained the same. F***CK. What birdcrap stuff is this? Lin Li knew his mana like the palm of his hand. At present, he was close to the maximum output of his mana. With such a massive influx of mana, even the most powerful magic equipment would be activated. How was it that this birdcrap ring had no response at all? Did I use the wrong method? The method of mana input did not work, but Lin Li was not discouraged. After all, this was only one of the ways to judge the attributes of a magic equipment, it was just the most widely used method. Apart from this, there were many ways to activate equipment, some creators even deliberately placed traps on the magic equipment. Lin Li gently held the ring inlaid with the black diamond in his hand and began his attempt to penetrate it with his mental strength. It was just like when he was forging the gold rod, he could establish a subtle connection with the ring with the penetration of his mental strength. Mental strength was a sensitive and delicate thing. Through the trace of mental strength, Lin Li could clearly grasp any situation that was in the ring. Lin Li felt an anomaly the moment his mental spirit penetrated the black diamond. It was a bizarre feeling, as if the trace of mental strength fully incarnated into Lin Li himself and that little black diamond had become the whole world. The world in the black diamond was just like the deep, dark light it gave off, bearing a strong, peculiar aura. Lin Li was aware of the abnormality as soon as his mental strength seeped in. There was an endless gloom all around. It seemed that no trace of mental strength could escape the darkness. A powerful attraction force, chaotic and violent, poured in from all directions, as if to tear the thread of mental strength to pieces. From the moment the powerful attraction force appeared, Lin Li knew he had done something stupid. The penetration of the mental strength was a very dangerous thing, not to mention doing it with a ring of unknown origin. If the mental strength was completely torn apart, even if he made great progress in magic in the future, it would not be able to make up for the flaw left behind in the mental strength. However, it was too late to regret now. Under the pull of the powerful attraction force, he was unable to recall that trace of mental strength. Lin Li could only try to steady his mind and control the mental strength with caution. Shuttling swiftly through the darkness, his goal was the only glint of light in the endless darkness. That glint of light was far ahead, faint and flickering but exceptionally brilliant in the endless darkness. The powerful attraction force was tearing in all directions, the darkness swept past, and every now and then, there were voices husky and deep, whispering and murmuring, and everything was as if in a dream. And with these voices were all kinds of emotions, sadness, joy, laughter, and tears. These innumerable emotions seemed to pour into his mind all at once, and even with his sick mental strength, he almost collapsed in an instant. After barely managing to steady his mind, Lin Li felt cold sweat breaking out all over his body. The pure mental attack was more frightening than a magic spell. It took only one careless move to plunge himself into a state of eternal damnation. At this point, he had begun to regret venturing to penetrate the black diamond with his mental strength. The sudden influx of a large amount of emotions was frantically tearing at Lin Li's mental strength. At that moment, he felt as if he had completely broken down, or as if he were a schizophrenic, at one time laughing, and at another crying. Accompanying the laughing and crying was a splitting pain. The pain that gushed out of the depths of the mind had nothing to do with the body. It was just the purest of all pain that couldn't be diverted nor relieved, he could only let it wreak havoc in his mind. Lin Li felt that he had gone insane under the inhuman suffering. No one knew how long this pain lasted, perhaps it was only 1 second, perhaps it was a year. Just as he was on the verge of collapse, a ray of light tore through the endless darkness. It was as if a red sun rising from the east at the darkest hour before dawn, shining in all its splendor and filling the whole world with life and vitality. This was what Lin Li felt at the moment. After that wisp of light tore open the endless darkness, boundless rays of light permeated it all at once and cleared away the haze in an instant. The world became pure all of a sudden, the dreamlike voices disappeared and the various emotions were gone without a trace. Through the mental strength, Lin Li could feel a kind of peace and tranquility very clearly. Apart from the dazzling light, there was an immense void all around. There was neither time nor space around, only the purest and most primitive nothingness, as if it were all but for the purpose of making this piece of light exist. After a short respite, Lin Li extended his mental strength and examined the bright light quietly. With his recent lesson, he did not dare to be careless. Everything was done with caution. His tenuous mental strength was divided into dozens of feelers, probing around one by one. The light seemed to contain some kind of power and rules. It maintained a tenacious and unyielding resistance to the invasion of that trace of mental strength from Lin Li. This resistance made the invasion extremely difficult, and Lin Li had to control his mental strength to wander around in search of cracks to penetrate. This was a process that required patience. After a few thousand tries, a trace of mental strength managed to get through at last. The mental strength fused with the light the moment it succeeded. At the same time, there seemed to be a loud noise in the deeper part of Lin Li's mind. It was a complete fusion, as if a soldering iron had come down, and a unique imprint of Lin Li had been branded on the ring. The branding was more thorough than the one on the gold rod. The gold rod was only controlled by a trace of residual mental strength. However, this time, Lin Li left his own mental mark on the ring completely, making the ring part of his mental strength. To prompt it, he didn't need any mana or connection through his mental strength, a mere thought could activate the attributes of the ring. Good stuff. When the ring was branded with his mark, Lin Li knew exactly what kind of magic equipment it was. It never occurred to him that a level 8 magical beast like the Leviathan gorilla could come to possess such a powerful treasure. What was really powerful about this ring was that it could create an elemental channel in an instant. All the magical elements that might hurt oneself would be guided into this particular channel. The magical elements guided into it would then be stored in their complete form, regardless of the elemental sequence or the magic structure. There would be no change. When needed, the owner of the ring could also release the stored magic by mana activation. The only thing that was regretful to Lin Li was that the channel could only be created once a day, and the magic that could be guided into it could not exceed his own level by 5. But apart from these two flaws, this ring with the black diamond was absolutely invulnerable. Not to mention the opportunity for a magic immunity, there was also an additional powerful magic spell on the house. If the ring was utilized well, with Lin Li's current strength, he might even have the chance beat an archmage. Not bad, not bad. After putting on the ring contentedly, Lin Li was grinning from ear to ear. It was only after a long time of elation that he suddenly remembered such a handy magic equipment had yet to have a name. Since it's used to immunize magic through a channel, I'll simply call it the Torrent of Elements. With this Torrent of Elements ring, Lin Li felt that he had no need to go to Jirian again. The Guild of Magic had been poor for years, and the only magic equipment it could bring out were probably the one that the man's family contributed. The magic equipment in the guild's warehouse either enhanced mental strength or supplied mana. What little enhancement did a monster like Lin Li, who was almost like a magical beast, need? Fumbling through the Ring of Endless Storm again, there seemed to be no more equipment that could be used. So, Lin Li naturally had his mind on potions. After selecting several commonly used herbs, Lin Li hesitated for a while, and gingerly took out a black lotus petal. This was probably what they called character determines destiny. If Jirian were to fight in this duel, with the old man's arrogant character and an opponent who had been defeated easily before, he would have gone to the duel straight, without even bringing his staff. But Lin Li had always been cautious. Even facing Cromwell, whom he had easily beaten before, he would still want to be fully prepared before the duel. Although the black lotus petals were precious, they were not worth mentioning compared to his own life. Moreover, he would not be so naive to think that this duel would be easy. Old Merlin had seen clearly what happened in the Emerald Tower that day. With his vision, how could he not see that Cromwell was no match for Lin Li? He was not an idiot. How could he send the sole heir of the Merlin family to die knowing the disparity in power? Lin Li was almost certain from all these unreasonable points that the Merlin family definitely had something formidable up their sleeves for this duel. The Cromwell who would appear at the Daylight Square tomorrow would definitely be a lot stronger than the one he knew. If you're enjoying my content, please consider donating a coffee. Or checking out my shirts on TeePublic. There was a heavy mist in the potion lab. Lin Li was busying himself with a solemn expression on his face. He was about to concoct the elixir of the sages, a true master-grade potion. This was the first time Lin Li used a master-grade formula ever since he'd transmigrated. The previous sobriety potion and the arcane magic potion were merely medium-grade formulas. Even the awakening potion that allowed Jirian to stun old Merlin outside the Emerald Tower was only a product of a high-grade formula. A master-grade potion that made use of the petals of the Black Lotus was not to be mentioned in the same breath with the other potions he had concocted before. Even Lin Li, who was accustomed to using the flaming hands for heating, lit up an amethyst lamp today. This was a luxury item that a real pharmacy master was qualified to possess. The amethyst was by nature extremely sensitive to mana. By filling it with a low-level fire magical crystal, the temperature could be precisely adjusted through the use of mana. Half a small beaker of peacebloom succus was placed on top of the lamp holder woven by the eternal adamantine thread. As the temperature of the amethyst lamp rose little by little, the beaker containing the peace bloom succus gradually began to boil. Lin Li gently swung the test tube in his hands, carefully shaking the wild steel bloom succus up. But in his heart, he was carefully calculating the time taken for the peace bloom succus to boil. The elixir of the sages was a fragile thing, and would not allow any room for error. If the boiling time was too long, it would lead to serious volatilization of the potion, and the effect would be greatly reduced when used. If the boiling time was too short, its mind-calming effects would not be completely achieved. A bottle of elixir of the sages that could predict the future would likely become a maddening lethal potion. The wild steel bloom succus in the test tube was completely shaken up, which was also the moment when the peace bloom succus in the beaker turned from turbid to clear. Lin Li quickly poured down the succus of the wild steel bloom. The mixture of two solutions, one cold and one hot, not only fogged the potion lab, but also quieted the boiling liquid in the beaker in an instant. The wild steel bloom grew in dark, damp places and had some medicinal properties tending towards cold. It was suitable to be used to cool the boiling peace bloom succus. After pouring the wild steel bloom succus, Lin Li did not adjust the temperature of the amethyst lamp. According to his calculations, it would take at least 30 seconds for the liquid in the beaker to boil again. Although 30 seconds was not long, it was enough for him to complete a bottle of the potion. Lin Li used the silver knife in his hand and gently cut 4 stalks of dracaena grass into portions of equal length. And then there was another cut, and a piece of terracone was cut in half. 1/2 of terracone and the 4 stalks of dracaena grass were put into the beaker at the same time, and they floated lightly in the clear liquid. After all these, Lin Li released an ice blast, creating a cold mist on the potion table. The little black lotus petal was enveloped in that mist. Under the stimulation of the two distinct attributes, a hiss was heard. The cold mist dispersed almost instantaneously, while the temperature on the potion table was still hot. Lin Li was not flustered as he released another ice blast. The black lotus, which grew only in the extreme temperatures, naturally contained massive amounts of fire magical element. It did not look any different than usually, but once the medicinal properties were released or when it collided with other magical elements, the blazing temperature could erupt in an instant. If it was put directly into the beaker without any prior processing, it could probably evaporate the whole beaker of succus in an instant. After cooling down with 3 ice blast spells, the black lotus petal was frozen at last. Under the light, the frozen black lotus petal exuded a glittering mystery. However, Lin Li had no time to admire it. The 3 ice blast spells had used up 9 seconds of his time. When that piece of sparkling frost fell, the liquid in the beaker that was about to boil seemed to rest suddenly. No fog arose and no magical element stirred, only a refreshing breath overflowed the beaker. There was a deep red glow in the previously clear liquid. This was the true color of the black lotus, as red as the fire, its own attribute. Lin Li heaved a long sigh of relief after finishing all these. This was probably the most tiring concoction ever since he'd transmigrated. Although the required skills were not profound, it demanded the precise control of time. Every step had to be precisely calculated in seconds, in particular, the last 30 seconds, where the cooling of the black lotus petal had to be completed. However, watching the full beaker containing the elixir of the sages standing there, Lin Li felt that all his tiredness was worth it. It was a master-grade potion using the black lotus petal. It would take only a small bottle to produce a time-warping effect, allowing the user to know in advance what would happen within 20 meters in the next 10 minutes. Even among the master-grade formulas, the elixir of the sages could be considered a true high-quality product. To some extent, forcibly distorting the rule of time was near to a miraculous realm. As long as a bottle of elixir of the sages was in his hand, Lin Li really did not believe that Cromwell would be able to hurt him in the following day's duel. The door of the potion lab opened suddenly as he was thinking of the duel. Jirian poked his head in and asked, with an obsequious smile, Felik, you are concocting potions again? Please cut the crap, President Jirian. Lin Li rolled his eyes in spite of himself. He knew the old fellow would find his way here. Ever since the arcane magic potion, Jirian's nose seemed to become more sensitive. As soon as he smelled something coming out of the pharmacy, the old fellow would rush in and watch at the side, waiting for Lin Li to prepare the potion so that he could fill his pockets with 1 or 2 bottles. Anyway, the old fellow was too thick-skinned to be driven away. After a few times, Lin Li simply paid no attention to him anymore. Moreover, it was really boring, waiting for the potion to boil. It seemed that time passed faster when there was someone nearby to talk to. As for the few bottles of potions he pocketed at the end, he'd just treat them as a payment for his company. But this time it was the elixir of the sages. Even he himself had to think it over time and again, before finally deciding to concoct a bottle, so naturally it had nothing to do with Jirian. So, without waiting for him to open his mouth this time, Lin Li shook his head and rejected him. Don't think about it this time. I prepared this for tomorrow's duel. Don't be a stranger, alright. A blush came to Jirian's aged face when his intentions were exposed. But with his character, it was impossible for him to acknowledge it. After laughing it off embarrassedly, he continued stubbornly, I saw that you've been in the potion lab for a long time and came to see whether there's anything you need. You could fool Kevin with that. Rascal, you don't know good from bad. I'm concerned about you. Jirian turned angry from the embarrassment and grumbled. At last, he was unwilling to give up, and finally revealed his intentions. Is it true you only concocted 1 bottle? Lin Li only felt energy sapped from him. If it's really 1 bottle, then forget it. Seeing Lin Li's expression, Jirian knew that this time was out of the question, and he dropped the subject. For some reason, the more I thought about it these 2 days, the more I felt that something is wrong with the duel tomorrow. Do you think Matthew, that old jerk, has prepared some trap for me to jump into it? You can't place a trap as and when you like. Without sufficient strength, it's useless even if you really set it up. Lin Li shook his head, dispelling the doubts in Jirian's mind. The situation in Gerosis is too clear. You've already stepped on old Merlin's face, and that old fellow didn't even dare to make a sound. What are you afraid of? But. There's no buts. I've also thought it through these few days. That day, there was only one reason why old Merlin forced me into a duel with his son, his hope that Cromwell could kill me in the duel. At this point, Lin Li stretched out 2 fingers. There are 2 benefits that arise from this. 1. To weaken the strength of the Guild of Magic. 2. To get rid of the threat of potions to the Merlin family. Jirian was still in doubt. Cromwell has the ability to do it? Maybe he does have. He's the only heir of the Merlin family. Should I kill him in the duel? Even if the Merlin family doesn't die, they'd be crippled. Old Merlin's not that stupid. But luckily, I'm not stupid either, and my luck's not too bad too. After practicing with Mage Grim for a few days, I've actually managed to climb to level 12 by accident. Even if old Merlin is formidable, he probably wouldn't have expected me to become a level 12 magic shooter. Of course. Who would have expected? At the mention of this, Jirian felt seriously resentful. They were all mages, by what virtue could this little rascal progress so fast? Besides, I prepared some petty stuff to surprise him in the duel tomorrow. With the Torrent of Elements ring and the elixir of the sages in his hands, Lin Li really doubted Cromwell could do anything to him. But just in case something happens, there was still worry on Jirian's face. After hesitating for a while, he clenched his teeth and fished out a necklace from his pocket. Why not wear this tomorrow? What's that? Lin Li was stunned for a slight moment, then reached out his hand to receive the necklace. Careful, this is an expensive stuff, don't spoil it. Jirian was in great trepidation as he watched Lin Li handle the necklace carelessly. This green quartz contains a purge spell. Activate it with the mana when you use it. It will help you remove undesirable conditions caused by spells below level 10. You rascal must be careful with it when you use it. This was the only item Teacher Osric gave me. I didn't even use it myself. I'll lend it to you tomorrow, and when the duel is over, remember to return it to me. Thank you. Lin Li nodded and prudently kept the necklace close to him. Oh right, and this. Jirian pondered and took out a pile of scrolls from his pocket. Choose a few useful ones. They might come in handy when the time comes. Okay, leave it here first, I'll pick them out later. After taking out the two stuff that he had long prepared, Jirian was still somewhat uneasy and began nagging at Lin Li about the things he should pay attention to during the duel. The Jirian at this moment seemed to differ from the usually arrogant president of the Guild of Magic. He seemed like a long-winded old man with his wordy advice. Don't worry. I'll keep an eye. While the two men were talking, they heard the door of the potion lab ring. Lin Li went to open the door. As it turned out, it was Kevin who had returned. Why did you come back? Lin Li was slightly surprised seeing the wan expression on Kevin's face. Let me catch a breath first and tell you slowly. Kevin had rushed back overnight from the Demon Fall Valley, and was already deadbeat. After entering the potion lab, he took in a few breaths and began explaining the purpose behind his return. I came back this time because of the hostages. Lin Li vaguely remembered that the Shadow's Nest had launched a sneak attack on the Demon Fall Valley around last week, not only destroying 2 guard towers but also capturing a few mages. As soon as Jirian had received the news, he had asked Kevin to do everything he could to get the hostages back. He was asked to offer additional money if he couldn't exchange them with the hostages from the Shadow's Nest. Iserhole was unwilling to exchange? No, he's willing. But not exchange hostages with hostages. Kevin shook his head and there was some helplessness in his expression. What Iserhole mean is, we can exchange for the hostages, but it must be done with potions. Fuck. Jirian's anger rose in an instant. What a grand dream he has. Wait, the old fellow was about to lose his temper but was stopped by Lin Li. How do they know that the Guild of Magic has potions? Kevin carefully recalled and said with uncertainty, maybe the news got out from Gerosis. The middle-aged man that Iserhole sent seemed to have mentioned the arcane magic potion auction once. How many do they want? Did they clearly state what kind of potions they need? 10 bottles for a hostage, and they specified the elixir of empowerment. Then that's simple. Lin Li mulled it over and laughed all of a sudden. Go and reply Iserhole. Say that the Guild of Magic will accept his terms. 40 bottles of elixir of empowerment will be sent to him the day after tomorrow at the latest. Let him send someone to prepare for the exchange of the hostages. That won't do. Kevin had yet to speak when Jirian, who was at the side, got anxious. How can you agree to such terms so easily? It's obvious that the jerk, Iserhole, is trying to extort us. That's what I hope. Lin Li's smile was unfathomable. If he doesn't extort us, I really couldn't think of anything else at the moment to stuff him to death. This time, we have to let that fellow from the Shadow's Nest know that pharmacists are actually capable of killing. And the more impressive the pharmacist is, the more impressive the way they kill. The next day, Gerosa City seemed to be shrouded in an eerie atmosphere. With the exception of the Merlin family and the Guild of Magic, the leaders of the other 16 forces arrived at Daylight Square early in the morning. They put on their best clothes, as if they were going to a big dinner party. Whether it was the assassin leader or the casino tycoon, all of them seemed to get along very well on this special day. There was harmony in the Daylight Square. They talked about the changing weather, the chaotic Gerosis, the results of the arcane magic potion auction, but never about the duel that was to come. At the beginning of the day, several streets near the Daylight Square were already blockaded. This was on an order issued by the Castellan Mansion and jointly executed by the 18 forces. No one could resist this force in Gerosa City. Vendors and residents were temporarily relocated, leaving only an empty Daylight Square. All those qualified to watch this duel were prominent figures in the Gerosa City, Castellan Isaac and his attendants, the leaders of the 18 forces and their henchmen, and several wealthy businessmen and celebrities in Gerosa City. The worst of them were at least eligible to attend the banquet at the Castellan Mansion. The grand scene left the assassin leader, Old Odin, with some regret. Why hadn't he taken up some celebrities' assassination requests before he came? In this way, he might have been able to earn some gold coins as an allowance after watching the duel. But he only entertained such thoughts in his heart. This was a duel between the Guild of Magic and the Merlin family. Even if old Odin had 100 times more nerves, he wouldn't dare to challenge the two giants of Gerosa City, in particular the current Guild of Magic. Old Odin was in no condition to provoke them. Backed by the wealth of the 18 forces, temporary stands were built overnight at the southern end of the Daylight Square. A polished marble table was arched around less than half of the Daylight Square. The previously harmonious atmosphere in the square immediately became quite distinct after a group of celebrities ascended the stands. The 6 underground forces and the 10 mage families were sitting at the top of the stands with the best view. Among them, 3 of the most prominent positions were left for Castellan Isaac, President Jirian, and Chief Matthew. The 3 most powerful men of Gerosa City should naturally sit in the most prominent positions. Even Isra of the Man's family and Reuben of the Saruman family did not dare to lay their hands on these seats. Among these forces, there was also a hierarchy. Among the mage families, Isra and Saruman were the closest to the 3 seats in the middle. As for the 6 underground forces, old Odin was the leader. After the rise of the Guild of Magic, this old friend of Jirian was suspected to be the leader of the 6 underground forces. As for the rich businessmen and celebrities, they naturally sat below the 18 forces as befitting their position in Gerosa City, where they had always been trampled by the 18 forces. What followed was a long wait. It was as if the Guild of Magic and the Merlin family had agreed beforehand. None had shown up at the Daylight Square. Although the leaders of the various forces on the stands waited anxiously, no one dared to complain, including Matsis of the Blood Brotherhood. Although he did dare to lash out at the leaders of the 2 powers behind closed doors, calling Jirian a lunatic and old Merlin an old turtle, once he was in the stands, he would not dare to insult either of them even if someone lent him 100 guts to do it. Amidst the anxious and helpless waiting, 2 figures finally emerged from the end of the streets. Cromwell was wearing a grey robe and clutching a staff embedded with magical crystals in his hand. His handsome, young face was brimming with confidence as he strolled through the streets with a radiant smile. On the contrary, beside him, the powerful archmage old Merlin looked somewhat aged and tired, and the smile he showed from time to time carried a hint of bitterness in it. When the old and the young entered the square, several of the strongest people on the stands, such as Reuben from the Saruman family, Isra from the Man's family, and Andrew, the Castellan's mage, felt almost at the same time that Cromwell seemed a little out of the ordinary today. Cromwell was the sole heir to the Merlin family and also a famous genius mage in the younger generation of Gerosis, so the Man's family and the Saruman family had paid close attention to him every day. At the same time, the 2 men also had to admit that Cromwell was really good, having the strength of a level 7 mage at such a young age. But when Cromwell showed up today, the 2 men suddenly realized they did not recognize him anymore. Is this person really Cromwell from the Merlin family? Isra and Reuben looked at each other incredulously. If it was really Cromwell, how could they be frightened by the aura he exuded? Both of them were powerful figures, and it would never be just a level 7 mage who made them feel the fear. At least level 14, the voice of the black-robed mage, Andrew, sounded from behind and startled both Isra and Reuben. Apart from Jirian and old Merlin, Andrew was definitely the most authoritative mage in Gerosis. Now that even he had said so, Cromwell's strength must have grown by leaps and bounds. How? How is this possible? Although Reuben specialized in conjuring, the Saruman family had its roots in magic after all. How could he not know that the ascension of magic level was by no means as simple as 1 + 1 = 2? In addition to the accumulation of mana and the training of skills, a great deal of time was required for research. He had not thought, not even in his dreams, that there would be someone like Cromwell, who went up 7 notches in a month. For a moment, the looks of the 2 family patriarchs were somewhat complicated. They were the first 2 forces to swing to the Guild of Magic at the auction for the arcane magic potion. To some extent, they had been tied to the Guild of Magic. Cromwell having level 14 in magic was definitely no good news to them. Just as the 2 men were feeling complicated, another 2 figures appeared at the end of the street. It was also a pair of an old and a young. But compared to the previous pair, the old looked full of confidence while the young was helplessly shaking his head, sighing. Jirian's presence always seemed to carry a sense of humor. The fellow shouted at old Merlin from a distance, before he entered the square. "Good morning, Matthew. You were too scared to sleep last night, weren't you? Look at your dark circles." Half of the force's leaders on the stand fainted on the spot. Could this old fellow be more arrogant, more unmannered? "Jirian, you're like a fly." Old Merlin's face was livid. He shot a cold glare at Jirian and walked straight up to the temporary grandstand. "Matthew, don't be in a hurry to walk away. Can't we have a little more talk?" Jirian refused to give up. He promptly followed old Merlin onto the stand and plopped into the seat that was prepared for him. He even winked discreetly at Castellan Isaac, who was sitting in the middle, beckoning him to make way so that he could get closer to old Merlin. Lin Li stood in the middle of Daylight Square, shaking his head resignedly as he watched Jirian's overstaffed figure from the back. "Now that both of them have arrived, let me, the overseer, say 2 words. Isaac ignored Jirian's harassment and rose from the marble seat, his voice booming over the square. A month ago, the Merlin family and the Guild of Magic had agreed on this duel. I, Isaac, am honored to be its overseer. I will do everything in my power to maintain the fairness of this duel. Now, allow me to introduce both sides of the duel. They are Felic of the Gerosis Guild of Magic and Cromwell of the Merlin family." Isaac's voice had just dropped when there was a burst of applause from the stand. This was dedicated to Cromwell and Lin Li. In this chaotic city of Gerosis, people only respected the strong and courageous. Whatever his status, the duelist who dared to walk into Daylight Square was entitled to all the applause. Isaac took his seat amidst all the applause, but his face was full of worries. After this duel, Gerosis City would no longer have peace. Old Merlin stood up with a weary look. His voice sounded hoarse, but it clearly reached everyone's ears. "I only want to say, whoever humiliates the Merlin family will have to pay the price." In the condemnation of old Merlin's double-edged remark, Jirian naturally rose to his feet. The smile on his chubby face was still there, but his voice spread like muffled thunder under the effect of magic. "Fuck the Merlin family, so what if I humiliate you?" The Daylight Square suddenly quieted down. There was a startled expression on everyone's faces. No one knew what exactly had happened, and they merely stared blankly at the 2 archmages. Old Merlin's face was livid and his eyes were fixed on Jirian as if they were about to burst into flames. Had it not been for Castellan Isaac sitting in the middle, holding the 2 men down, perhaps there would have been another battle between Gerosis' most powerful mages on the stands before the duel below started. "Forget it, I shall not teach you a lesson for the time being. I'll settle it with you after the duel ends." Jirian, who was just chewing out old Merlin earlier on, swore in a fit as if he was the victim now. Only with Isaac's persuasion did he sit indignantly in his place. There was a lot of drama on the stands, but Lin Li's attention had been on Cromwell. Cromwell, on the other side, seemed to be very different from the past. Surrounding him was a powerful aura, something Cromwell had never had before. The magical wave emanating from him was even more powerful than Lin Li's own. "The Merlin family is indeed impressive." Feeling the surprise from Lin Li, a cruel smirk appeared on Cromwell's confident face. He had been waiting so many days for the moment when he would step onto the Daylight Square. He relished the surprise in Lin Li's eyes, and hoped that the mage who had humiliated him would show the expression of despair and fear in the face of absolute power in the ensuing duel. The humiliation caused by the waterfall strike in the Emerald Tower had always been deeply engraved in Cromwell's heart. He could still remember how Lin Li had looked at him with condescending disdain, not regarding himself as a level opponent at all. The waterfall strike had knocked him out of the Emerald Tower, which seemed to him like throwing out a bag of garbage. "Long time no see, Mage Felic." Cromwell greeted him in exactly the same way as when Lin Li was leaning over him on the steps of the Emerald Tower. Cromwell's heart was full of anticipation when he said that sentence. He anticipated seeing the expression of fear on his opponent's face, like how he did when he was lying on the steps. "Long time no see, Mage Cromwell." Unfortunately, Lin Li disappointed him. The surprise in his eyes was only fleeting, and it was followed by a smile that Cromwell abhorred. This polite yet condescending smile instantly reminded him of his humiliation. I hope you can still smile later. A faint gleam of malice was revealed in Cromwell's narrowed eyes. Same to you. Just as the two were head-to-head with each other, Castellan Isaac rose from his seat once again. As the overseer, I declare that the duel begins now. As soon as Isaac's voice fell, Lin Li sensed a violent wave of magic. Then, he saw Cromwell lift his staff, and a ball of fire, with a flaming tail in tow, was roaring towards him. Damn! Lin Li propped up his elemental shield while secretly regretting sneaking an attack on him with the waterfall strike. Not only did it trigger the battle between Jerosis's most powerful mages, he even taught such a guy like Cromwell to be smart. He even knew how to play a preemptive strike now. When the ball of fire hit the elemental shield and stirred up a dazzling spark, Lin Li couldn't help but startle. When did this fellow become so strong? Just a fireball had almost caused his elemental shield to collapse. He was probably nearing the strength of a magic shooter. After barely receiving the fireball with his elemental shield, Lin Li dared not have the slightest negligence anymore. He prepared a wind blade in each hand, but was not in a hurry to release them. He was waiting for Cromwell to begin his spell recitation. The smile on Cromwell's face deepened after the fireball. Although it failed to crack down the elemental shield completely, it gave him a good sense of his opponent's strength. A mere level 12, in Mage's battle, a difference of more than 2 levels almost meant that it would be a crushing of one side. Cromwell already had full confidence in winning this duel. He cast an elemental shield on himself too, then began reciting at the full height of his voice. When the light of the elemental shield shone, a wry smile appeared on Lin Li's face. This fellow had really smartened up. But now his arrow was fitted to the string, and he had no choice but to fire. The two wind blades tore through the air with a piercing sound and bumped into the elemental shield that was on Cromwell without suspense. Lin Li knew very well that the two wind blades wouldn't do any damage. With Cromwell's strength being close to that of the archmage, the elemental shield that he held up could probably withstand even a level 15 spell, not to mention the 2 level 1 wind blades. So, Lin Li did not dare to hope for any results at all. As soon as the 2 wind blades were released, he also began a long recitation. With his massive mental strength, Lin Li barely caught up with the progress of the spell. Both of them completed a level 9 flaming storm almost at the same time. Boom! Boom! The blares sounded almost concurrently. In an instant, a fire rose in the middle of Daylight Square. The earth-shattering collision between the two spells had everyone on the stands exclaim loudly. With the exception of a few, no one thought that they would see a battle of this level today. Before arriving at the Daylight Square, almost everyone's impression of them was that of young geniuses. They had talent and strength, but it was only among the younger generation. Little did they think it would be a battle that could rival the level of the archmages fighting. Just look at their skillful and rapid spellcasting technique and the powerful magical wave they released. These people even had an illusion. Was it Jirian and Matthew who were battling in their stead? Both were hit almost simultaneously by the flaming storm, but the results were different. The elemental shield on Lin Li was instantly broken by the crush of the magic level and the previous impact of the fireball. Cromwell, who was also standing in the midst of the flames, had maintained the faint halo on his body all the time. The gap between the two levels was exposed in a flash. "Are you still able to laugh now?" Cromwell revealed a cruel smile, pointing at Lin Li with the ether staff in his hand. The magical crystal at the tip of the staff glowered in a blue light, and the roar of an icicle followed. At this moment, half of the audience's hearts were clenched. Most local forces were related to the Guild of Magic. Jirian, who was sitting on Isaac's right, tightly clenched his fists. As an archmage, his vision reached farther and was clearer than others. Jirian knew Cromwell was nearing the strength of an archmage with that fireball he released. And sure enough, he had also had the absolute advantage in the clash of the flaming storm afterwards. Now that Lin Li's elemental shield had been broken, even if he topped it up with the ice armor spell, it might still be difficult for him to receive this icicle. And then Jirian indeed saw the ice armor propped up in front of Lin Li. But for some reason, Jirian could feel that there was something wrong about this ice armor. At the moment when the ice armor was propped up, the icicle had been shot. TCH. At the instant the icicle came in contact with the ice armor, a piercing sound rang through the daylight square. Phew, Jirian heaved a long sigh of relief, for he already saw that after that icicle hit the ice armor, it did not break it down as he had imagined, but swept past the glittering ice, bringing with it pieces of ice debris. It was then that Jirian understood why he'd felt there was something wrong with the ice armor earlier on. The angle at which the ice armor was propped up was changed by shifting the elemental sequence. Kudos to this kid for thinking of it. The ice armor propped up obliquely would naturally be more advantageous than the one propped up on the front in the face of an oncoming icicle. The smile on Cromwell's face froze as he failed to score with the icicle. He had never imagined that his opponent would fend off the icicle in such a way. There were gasps of awe from the stands, and the smile was still on Lin Li's face. Perhaps only he knew that he had no need for the ice armor. He could totally receive the icicle with the strong magic resistance attributes of his Robe of Wrath. However, he didn't want to reveal the secret of the Robe of Wrath so early. He wanted to surprise Cromwell with it at a more critical time. After a short spell cycle, Lin Li had gained a new elemental shield. At least on the surface, both sides were back to the same starting line once more. But the disparity of 2 levels still existed. Just as Lin Li was putting up his elemental shield again, Cromwell began another round of outbursts. This time, he made use of a large amount of low-level spells. Even if his mental strength couldn't be compared to that of Lin Li's, with an absolute dominance in level, the amount of instantaneous spells he could release was definitely not less than Lin Li's. Numerous wind blades and arcane missiles landed unceasingly on the elemental shield, stirring up ripple after ripple on the sheer layer of light. And under this storm-like attack, Lin Li's counterattack was equally sharp. Mind control, delirium, the harassment was so varied and numerous that Cromwell had to divert his attention to set up a mental protection field. Lin Li released a few wind blades from time to time, constantly trying to weaken the elemental shield on Cromwell. Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.